recorded a meditation for your podcast. So we had a
Right.
conversation that's podcast style, and then I recorded a meditation.
Right.
And I didn't realize that it was going to be put on like Insight Timer.
Yeah.
And I gotta tell you, at that period of time, I recorded that meditation very whimsical because you were like, hey man, would love to get that meditation and get it all posted. And I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do that. And I just like very whimsically did it like on my couch while my wife and kids ran to the store. Like it was very like
Impromptu.
just impromptu riffy, which is kind of my thing.
It's very Zen.
It is very Zen, but also can sometimes be chaotic at times and undependable. So I apologize for that.
Well, no, I mean that was a really popular episode. People loved that. The Fruits of the Spirit, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And people really loved that, and asked for more. So
it got me thinking because my wife, this past summer, she says, "Hey, I didn't know you were on Insight Timer," and I was like, I don't think I'm on Insight. She's like, I typed in Fruit of the Spirit and you were the first one. She goes, I didn't know it was you. And I started playing it and she like laid down and like got herself prepared. And then it was like her husband's voice, you know what I mean? And she was like,
completely took her out, right?
Yeah. And it was just really, really interesting. So, and then I didn't know it had like all these comments and I'm like reading through the comments. And I forgot like one of the fruits of the spirit or whatever, because I was riffing. I mean, like I should have been a little bit more prepared for that. And somebody was like, oh, you forgot this, or I learned it in this order. And I was like, I should redo that at some point. I don't know. Maybe it's good as it is and it's imperfection, but
I mean, the Insight Timer crowd, like a lot of them are like fantastic. Like they're just really great people, really appreciative. And then like, 1 out of every 20 comments you get, somebody's like, it's like reviews for anything,
Sure.
It's like 1 star, audio is too loud or something like that.
Right, yeah.
Like, okay.
But. Yeah. Well, I mean, people do get finished, especially I do feel like sometimes in those circles, like it's ironic that much of the spiritual path, if not all of it, is about humbling yourself, ridding yourself of ego and judgment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But some of the folks that I've run with in these circles are the most like finicky and judgmental folks of like,
oh yeah,
so many, and not to talk shit or anything, but just really like,
no, talk shit, man. I'm all about it.
It's interesting.
Just kidding.
It's just interesting to me, So, well, man, I'm curious to. We were talking a little bit before we got started recording just about how the Methods podcast has taken an evolution, it seems like. And like I was saying, if anybody's listening that's been following the Methods Instagram for a little bit of time, it's definitely been able to explore a lot of different ways and methods of encountering meditation, contemplation. And so that has definitely evolved, since whenever we first crossed paths. And so I'm curious if you can just speak to a little bit like the initial heart, the initial intent with starting Methods, and then sort of this past couple of years of you pursuing that, what that's looked like and what's been the influence for its evolution.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been an introspective, kind of introverted person, and I've always had kind of that rich interior life. And so I've always been drawn to the esoteric side of things rather than the exoteric, the outward expression of things. I've always been drawn to the inward. Like, I mean, when I was little, like I started reading Harry Potter and then I wanted to know what was underneath of that. And I'm like, oh, magic, and so I started looking into the only thing I had access to at the time with Windows 95, which was, some geosite stuff on like Wicca. And so I started doing that. And then as a, growing up in like a Methodist household, that didn't fly. And so I kind of had to like hide my stuff. Like I created like a false drawer and had like stuff hidden. And they found that, and then they were like, okay, that's not going to work.
Did they make you burn it?
Oh yeah, it was actually pretty traumatic.
Really?
Yeah. And then I started doing martial arts later on, you know, the exoteric. And then I was like, okay, well, what's underneath that? And so I started going into like Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. And I read the Unfettered Mind by Taekwondo Soho, which was like my first foray into Zen. And my family ended up, you know, becoming like evangelistic. They converted to a non-denominational church, however that works. But
so
they,
common. Was this in the like early 2000s maybe?
Yep.
Or,
Yep.
So very common.
So I kissed dating goodbye, and, you know, did the whole spiel, and so they made me, you know, get rid of all that stuff too. And then I got saved, was like super Christian for a while, then became disillusioned with it, like most people do.
Especially
Hopefully.
who are more thinkers or curious people like
Right.
yourself, of wanting to see what's deeper, you know?
Yeah. And so like, it's like, you know, I'm always trying to go deeper. And so I was trying to dig deeper into that, and I realized, oh, there's like, you know, solid metal here. Like there's nothing deeper. Like it's just, that's it. And so then I left, and then years later, I started going to a small cooperative Baptist fellowship church called the Restoration Project, who the pastor is an Old Testament scholar. And that was really helpful for me to like reframe Christianity. And so they began doing these little meetings called methods, where they would explore like Christian contemplation and different things like that. And so that kind of drew me back to my Zen days. And then I realized, okay, the deeper thing that I was longing for in all these different things is in Christianity, and it was there the whole time. And so I wanted to, you know, start putting the method stuff out publicly. That way people like me, people like me that were more interiorly oriented could find the wisdom that's in that tradition that is just not known to most people. And so that's where it started. And then from there, I ended up separating a little bit the Methods Project from the church, because I wanted to take it into a interspiritual, interreligious dialogue kind of direction, looking at, you know, Islam, looking at Buddhism, looking at Taoism, looking at all the great faith traditions, different philosophies, postmodern philosophy, Altizer's Death of God philosophy, liberation theology, all that stuff. And that kind of, probably for good reason, you know, was seen to be like, this might be a little too abrasive or heavy, you know, for the people that church serves. And so I just kind of ran with it. And then now I'm kind of, now that I've explored a lot of different methods, a lot of different paths and traditions, I think I'm moving into a space where it's not specific to a particular religious path or spiritual path, but kind of seeing them all as facets, as a more cohesive, you know, image of reality where everything belongs, you know, as Richard Rohr says. And so the one direction I'm going into is that the methods are a trap, ultimately, you know, like all methods are traps, and they're ways that we convince ourselves that we are working on ourselves, that we're becoming better, that we're becoming closer to God, that we're, you know, achieving and gaining. And that's the wrong perception, in my opinion.
Totally.
Because it's all a game of subtraction. There's nothing to achieve, nowhere to go, nothing to find.
How can you get closer to something that is the fabric of your very essence? You know?
Right.
How do you,
And so I think like like you were alluding to, the people a lot of times that are in contemplative circles can be very judgmental and um, full of ego. And I think that that's because there's something missing in the conversation. And I've talked to other people about it too, because um, people will talk about like how wretched St. Augustine or Augustine is, and like the idea of original sin, and like it's terrible, like throw it out, this and that. And I mean, I didn't know the guy, so I can't vouch for him, but I do think that there is something to be said for not skipping a step.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the step that gets skipped, it goes from uh Christianity is the only way to heaven, blah blah blah, everybody else is going to hell, fundamentalism. And then it skips to, oh no, I'm one with God, everything's fine, everybody's going to heaven, there's no problem here. And the step that gets skipped, I think, is the step of no self.
Mm.
You can't go from, oh, I'm an individual self, to I'm one with God. Like, there is no individual self that is one with God.
Yeah.
Like, you can't skip the no self
Mm. Yeah.
process,
Yeah.
because the very identity of the self, that boundary that we put up between me and you, between us and another species, between us and inanimate matter, is just an arbitrary separation between what is. And so we're
Yes.
cutting up reality into bite-sized chunks so we can make sense of it and digest it. And so I think once the boundaries of the self are dissolved, then the union with God is just something that is seen for what it is. And so lately, A Course in Miracles has been really helping me, like, put
Yeah.
Christian language to that, Advaita Vedanta, like the non-dual perspective
Mm-hmm.
of everything. And so, sorry, I'm kind of rambling on and on.
Please,
Did you have
dude.
something?
No, this is awesome. I think that's such a crucial part is to not skip that. And I think exactly what you're talking about is true. We've not handled the issue of the ego, or even maybe that's even a poor way to say it, to making a deal of the ego. I don't know. It's a unique thing. But I'm curious how A Course in Miracles has been fitting into all of this. And not that I'm shocked necessarily, but I'm curious how or why you wanted to help put Christian language on it. Like, it seems like you've been exploring and putting on these different understandings. What's the draw to maybe looking into that, or re-embracing some of that? If you are, I don't know.
I mean, it's helpful for me because that's just my conditioning. Like, I can read the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita, or the Dhammapada or whatever, and gain what I can gain from it as a white cis hetero Westerner, like a very narrowly defined cultural lens. But I was raised that way, and so certain metaphors and structures are just ingrained in my conditioning, and so they're going to speak to me in a more direct way sometimes than others. And so I know a lot of people are in the same boat.
Yeah.
And like you said, like, a lot of people in those contemplative circles still have a lot of ego. And so, like, we think we're playing the game, but the game's playing us in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And like, people that I know that are like way more knowledgeable than me on the history of the Christian tradition, and they know all the feast days, they know all the saints, they know like all the names of each desert father and where they grew up, and what year they died, and all this stuff. And but there's still a lot of ego, which to me is the whole crux of the issue. The ego is based on separation. And so A Course in Miracles kind of, it reframes non-dual wisdom in a Christian way in a really, really simple like format. And it's like, it's kind of direct. So you kind of have to like learn the language of the book.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really stands out is that nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists.
Mm.
And so, just a really small snippet of a phrase that when you get into it, it really recasts a lot of stuff in a different light. So like the idea that nothing real can be threatened. So anything that can be threatened, whether that's my idea of myself, whether that's my family, whether that's my job, whether it's this or that, anything that can be threatened that gives a spirit of fear is unreal.
Yeah.
So again, like whenever I notice like that I'm feeling threatened or that I'm afraid of something, I can recognize, oh, that's not real.
Yeah.
Like that person that's, occupying my body, the ego, having a fear about something is ultimately not real.
Yeah.
And then the flip side of that is nothing unreal exists. So the ego doesn't exist because it is characterized by seeing fear and threat and lack. And then what really exists is God, is love.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you take away what's not real, all that's left is what's real.
Yeah. 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 I mean, to get to that point though, to where you are experiencing that in real time, like, because I mean, I'm tracking 100% and I feel so aligned with that. And that's been my own experience of venturing into that. I'm curious, for someone who is in a place of deconstruction right now, where they're just taking it all apart, to not just bypass that step and go to the other. I'm curious, from your perspective, what are ways that you have taken or that you've observed that can help people move more in that direction and really exploring that, and to get into the illusion of the self, that and the transcendence of who we are as beings, as being unified with God, and then ultimately being incarnation of God into this world to participate in healing and all of these justice and all of the beautiful things. But I think getting into this notion before we get sometimes into the action of what can happen, because I think like the ego is what happens. It gets into action, what I've sensed. And some people might give me some backlash for this, whatever, but venturing deep into the progressive circles, it's like, well, this is just as much, if not more rigid than what I've experienced and have come from.
Yeah.
And I think it's because largely we've forgotten that spirituality, in my opinion, whatever is going to manifest itself in the physical has to first take root in the spiritual. It's like Jesus says, from the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. And I think in addition, from the abundance of the heart, the hands do, from the abundance of the heart, the affiliations are made, or, whatever it might be. It's whatever's inside is what materializes and manifests. And I think that sometimes we just try to quickly associate, like people in deconstruction, we reevaluate, rethink, deconstruct, and then immediately we're like, this, and like I'd latched on to progressive Christianity for a while as a sort of antidote to that, but not never, but in the midst of dealing with the ego and the self through it, and so anyways, kind of rambling myself, but I'm just kind of curious how that has been for yourself, because what you're talking about is some sort of self, looking at yourself first, going through some of that, doing a lot of the internal work that has to be done, that then eventually manifests itself outwardly in other ways. Do you feel that same way, that people have a tendency to do that through deconstruction? Did you have a time too that you felt like you were trying to latch on, or have seen that?
Yeah, I see. When I went through my deconstruction, what happened was I, as interiorly as I'm oriented, I went even further in. I was like, lock the door, throw away the key. No one, people were knocking on the door like, "Hey, is Jory in there?" And I'm like, no answer. But a lot of people that I was with, um, specifically one person in mind, who I won't mention, but they were going through a similar transition, but instead of going inward, they went outward
Hmm.
because it was all about identity. And so, you know, we identified as this person, this Christian person, and then we realized, oh no, everything we were told is bullshit, basically. Um, and so that identity goes away. And so what a lot of people do then, like you said, is just attach to the next best
Hmm.
thing, which is usually the opposite of that. But it's not that, if you go in opposite direction, you're still attaching to an identity that's
Yeah.
not you. And so I saw that with, people that I was close with, that, it was this move towards progressive Christianity, which meant not that uh, the judgmental attitudes that characterized conservative or evangelical Christianity were no more, but just that they were pointed in a different direction.
Yeah.
That, the judgmental attitudes were not pointed towards, uh, Satan worshipers anymore, but it was pointed
Unbelievers, the
unbelievers.
unsaved.
It was pointed back towards the backward, uh, impressionable people that had got caught up in that. Well, that was you, like that was me, like. And
Hmm.
so when we judge other people for what we experienced, we're just judging ourselves.
Totally.
And so it's a complicated form of self-hatred, I think.
Mm.
And um and so for me, uh I was kind of going through a way that didn't make sense to a lot of people. Like specifically one person, um, I say that I went through a lot of karma yoga with this person because um, they were just generally a very difficult person to
Hmm.
get along with. And so I was using that as a doorway for myself to grow spiritually. Like I was trying to, whenever something happened that like just set me off, or like, was like difficulties, relationship wise, I would use that as an opportunity to practice kenosis, to surrender. And so it was very effective for that. But how it manifested was like we were at a whiskey tasting one night, and uh, and there was all these very fine like single malt scotches, um, and we each have a dram, try another one, and he would then ask me like, well, which one's like better, this one or this one, or like which one's your favorite out of these two or these three or whatever. And at the time, like, I mean, I'm not a diehard, Scotch fan, but I do enjoy a dram.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, this one's really good, and this one's also very good, and this one over here, that one is also very good. And like I was like, I viewed each one of them as their own thing.
Yeah.
And so there was no like hierarchical difference in that for me. And that's a really simple example of the mindset of like non-judgment. Each thing is one taste.
Yeah.
And uh that made this person very angry, I think, because we want our own states, our own inward states, to be reflected out there.
Yeah.
And if it's not, then then we get pissed off. And
Yeah.
so if
And we
you're
get mad at other
judgmental,
people that don't have the same palate that we do, you know? It's
yeah,
like,
yeah. Yeah, so for me, like forgiveness has been huge. And as
mm,
far as like drawing that back to the Christian tradition, like how that works in my life now is that forgiveness isn't asking um or it isn't seeing something or overlooking something. Let's say it's not overlooking something that happened, like, oh, you did this to me, and it really sucked, but I guess I'll forgive you, or like, I'll forgive you so that it makes me feel better, or like, whatever. But forgiveness is a paradox because it asks you to forgive what no one ever did,
mm,
because the person that did that thing was just attacking their own self, attacking their own projections.
right.
And the person that received that insult was just a projection of your own mind. And so nothing really happened.
Yeah.
And so that's what forgiveness is seeing the inner nature of the person uh, that you perceive committed the harm, and then you who received it as just illusions, and then everything becomes just really laughable because there's no one to be offended, there's no one to be hurt,
Yeah. Yeah.
because nothing
That's
real
such
can
a
be said.
growth. But that within itself, I think, is what, good old Paul's talking about spiritual maturity. And I think for me, what I hear you saying is what I would definitely agree with is on both sides of the equation, there's just a lack of growing up in the understanding of the self in the universal Christ and
Hmm.
what this means for actually living and moving and having my being in the world, We
Yeah.
just trade one offense for another and one party for another. And sometimes I think that can serve a purpose for a particular period of time. But at some point, like, I do think it's maturing in a sense of self that understands ourself as being unoffendable people of peace. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
and to me, it's not necessarily the easiest thing, but to me, it's the simple things. As I circle back to Jesus and I circle back to my Christian faith, I'm like, oh, it's all of the very easy stuff that like I passed over in search of like the really hard theological stuff, quote
Hmm.
unquote. And it's like all of that is now the most difficult teacher to me, in those things. It's like, how do I understand, like what you're saying, forgiveness? How do I
Hmm.
understand the self? And that's the hard part that I think is the step that is being skipped largely, and is we've moved over that sense of trying to um, do that, or even trying to even improve ourselves or better. I was just listening to Alan Watts talk about the futility of self-improvement,
Yeah. Yeah, because who's
and
doing that? Who's doing the self-improvement?
he says the very voice that is saying that you need to be improved is the one that needs improved. What do you do then? And
Yeah.
so it's like in the same way, the one that is offended, what do you in the mind is the very one that also does the offending. So
Yeah.
now what are you left with?
Yeah.
So it's good stuff for people to explore as they are deconstructing. So as you've reformulated some sort of faith, how do you think you are putting things together? What are the things that you feel like are the most beneficial and helpful for your growth? And once again, that seems linear. Um, I know all of this is not very linear,
Yeah. It's hard to
but I
talk
mean,
about too and put in words.
yeah. How do you articulate the mystic side of things? I did a podcast earlier with the guy named Marshall Davis, who does a podcast called The Tao of Christ. And there's a
I've
few
I've seen that.
times,
Yeah.
yeah, really, really sweet guy. And a few times we're like, how do you articulate the idea of unitive awareness? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But I mean, as we invite people into that, to some degree or another, I think it's helpful, especially if we think back to, and we're always deconstructing to some degree or another, but that real nitty gritty sort of deconstruction where like theological things are coming apart at the hinges and stuff. As what has been helpful for you as you've kind of found some sort of path that feels like balance to you in life, and then what would be some of the things that you might relay to others who are in the midst of it right now?
Yeah, I'd say never never settle on one thing, you know. Never let the grass grow under your feet, I think is what people say.
Yeah.
um because if you stay with one thing and get stuck in that rut of familiar concepts, eventually they'll lose their meaning. And so you Gurdjieff says that, you know, like methods or theology or spiritual practice or whatever are just alarm clocks to wake us up to who we really
Mm,
are. And as most people know, like once you have the same alarm for some time, you start sleeping through it. And so you kind of have to keep finding new alarms to wake you up.
I like
And
that.
so that's why I try to just perpetually do iconoclasm with, you know, like, okay, what's my conception of God? Let's bulldoze that. And because, and a lot of people say like, oh no, you have to like reconstruct, you know, you have to, you know, build like a new box and everything. And I think that's true to some aspect, but you have to be careful who's the one building the box.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Like if it's your ego, then you haven't fully deconstructed yet.
yeah.
And because the reality is that after deconstruction, like, or once you fully deconstruct even the idea of self, then there needs to be no temple,
Mm,
you know, because the spirit of God is what exists. It's what is.
yes.
And so it's uncontainable. And so the second thing is find a spiritual director. Like,
Mm,
I mean, that's probably not for everybody, I guess, but for me, that's also been very helpful as someone, again, who's super interiorly oriented, to have someone else that's in a position to just keep pointing you back to yourself. You know,
yeah.
when you get lost in a concept and you think I am this concept, or I am this belief, or I am this thought, or I am this political alignment, or I am this socioeconomic class or gender or whatever, um, a spiritual director can be the one to keep pointing you back to yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and as the Course in Miracles teaches, God only has one son, and that I say son in a non-gender specific
Sure.
way, but uh, you know, a lot of people balk at that. You know, like only one son. Like, no, we're all. It's like, no, but you're not, because if you're speaking from the ego, then God knows nothing about you,
Mm,
and God only has one son, and you are that, meaning that who you think you are does not exist.
mm,
You know, and
yeah.
that can hurt for a lot of people, I think, but
Yeah.
it's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially entering into, or at least trying to begin to peek into that true self that is like Christ is the universal Christ, the one that is in all, like Christ in me, the hope of glory, right? So, I've not ventured into the Course in Miracles. My wife has some. That thing is, I take that back. I did venture into it, and then I was like I do with most things, I get really into it for like a week or two, and then I'm like on to something else. And now I'm always in like so many different books, and it's if we want to talk about ego or whatever, or personality, Enneagram stuff, I'm a 7. So I'm very, whatever is in, seems fun and enthusiastic and stirs at me in that way, I will certainly just completely leave whatever I'm doing and just go do that,
Right.
So
Yeah.
uh, it's it's good and bad, all mixed up together. But the point is, I was in Course in Miracles and then started to venture away from it. But if I'm not mistaken, when you're talking about the one son, this is something that is more of a not necessarily the man of Jesus of Nazareth who walked on around and on the Sea of Galilee, right? We're talking about something way more transcendent than that is alive even still today. Is that
Yeah.
right to
Yeah. No,
say?
it's before Abraham was, I am,
Yeah.
that the existential poetry of, the Hebrew scriptures. Uh, and I think that's somewhere for me where Christianity and uh, Vedanta kind of meet up, because there's in both of them there's this emphasis on the I am,
Hmm.
and to me that is God's son, that is Christ,
Yeah.
and that's the unconditioned. There's nothing that it depends on, and so when we realize that that is our true nature, then we realize, okay, that means that there's nothing that my inner nature depends on.
Right.
So I can be killed, and, I can be slandered, and I can be, uh, beaten to a pulp, but who I really am is not dependent on outside factors. And so once you realize
Yes.
that, then like your attachments and your aversions don't really mean anything anymore, because they're just functions of the ego.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's the,
You're like, oh, I've understood now. It's just this is preference, this is whatever. And like to use the whiskey, like, oh, okay, like this is what this incarnation thinks tastes good and doesn't
right.
need
Yeah.
any other one to agree or disagree on that
Right.
fact.
Yeah. I think is it in the Tao Te Ching that says, or it might be one of the Chinese fathers, but enlightenment comes quickly for those who have no preferences,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep.
And so not that you can't say, like you said, like this incarnation enjoys dark chocolate, not milk chocolate,
Yeah.
but you know that you're not identified with it,
Sure.
you're the observer, you're the awareness that's unconditioned.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's really good. It's a it's a complete, in the full sense of its term, a rebirth. It's a born again, I think, sort of experience to enter
mhm.
into this. And I think that we are entering into an age, hopefully, when we are seeing a sort of awakening happen, which awakening or enlightenment, or Jesus used born again. I mean, all of these are terms for becoming aware of the fabric and nature of who we are, transcending, the flesh or the self or any of this. And I think that there is that happening right now. And I hope that it's something that we're able to really see, like, come to some sort of fullness. I think it's something that we need to see in a sort of big born again experience, not conversion experience. We've been disillusioned with born again experiences being a conversion,
Mhm.
but a true renewal of the self in terms of its Christ nature.
Yeah.
um and so, yeah, I think we're on the brink of that right now, of people understanding. I love Jesus talking with Nicodemus, and Nicodemus is like, do I crawl back in my mother's womb? He's very like logical about it.
Mhm.
And Jesus is like, no, you're born from above, and where the wind blows, nobody knows where the spirit is. But it's this very sort of esoteric understanding of what it means to enter into the abundant life. um, and he talks about being born again from above. And I think that on both the conservative and liberal side of Christianity, my hope is that we're growing into some sort of collective born againness, because it seems like almost every day I'm seeing people venture more into this sort of mystic understanding than any other affiliation. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe my algorithm's just so set up to tell me what I want to see and hear. But
Right. Yeah.
but I'm curious, like, do you get that sense too? Do you feel like there's like something that is really happening that is transcendent right now?
I think, I mean, obviously in the United States, we're like super polarized on basically any issue from big to small. Um, and so I think there's some errant data in the feed that's like throwing off the numbers, like you said, because like Richard Rohr says, oppositional energy only creates more oppositional energy. So
Yeah.
we're seeing it just like multiply and multiply. And but I think in the larger, like, like the Teilhard, Desjardins like scope, our ego was something that evolved, that we've inherited
Hmm.
our sin from Adam, our separation, this egoic identity that evolved as a survival mechanism for us and served its purpose. I think now we're uh, starting to evolve out of it,
Yeah.
and I hope that that's true, um, because I mean the true meaning of religion is religio, is to religament, to reconnect,
Yes. To bind together.
to bind together,
Yeah.
and the opposite of that is diabolos, to throw apart, and that separation of ego and the unification of uh, non-self is I think the direction we're going. And like Julian of Norwich says, both the fall and the recovery from the fall are all grace.
Yeah.
And so once we can get to that hard pill, once we can swallow that one, that even what we perceive to be separating us from God is also grace,
Hmm.
then like Ram Dass says, like, it feels like you're cheating.
Yeah.
When even suffering is grace, you feel like you're cheating.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I love that. Oh, Ram Dass. If
Yeah.
only I'm Lindsay, my wife and I were talking about what Ram Dass would be saying just about 2020, would
Yeah.
love, just so wish that we could add his wisdom through some of this too, man. But I mean, anyways, so as we wrap up, I'm curious, just with meditation and how that has been informative for you. If someone um, is wanting to explore that and experience that in early stages, what would be some good resources, some directions to point them to? And then also, how has meditation really been a key player in this for you, for some sort of reconstruction or balance in life?
Yeah. I definitely recommend Insight Timer, um, because I mean, it has all the method stuff, obviously, but then it also has just a bajillion other guided meditations, and um, those can be really helpful at first. But I think definitely once you've got kind of the gist of of how meditation works, um, definitely just use the timer feature, and have it ring a bell and then 20 minutes later ring another bell. And because it can be easy to just listen to a guided meditation and have it take you through what it needs to take you through, but a lot of times that leaves a lot of work to be done.
Hmm.
So if you've got time, like, do your guided meditation and then, leave another 10-15 minutes of silence on at the end. But because the silence is where we really are uh, aware of our thoughts and our body. And um, when we're listening to a guided meditation, we can only hear, the person's voice and what they are trying to direct our attention or thoughts to. But I think the real work happens when there's nowhere to hide. Uh, there's no music to hide in. There's no uh, thoughts or person directing us, directing our thoughts. It's just the phenomenon of our thoughts and our emotions and our body happening, because when we're at work or when someone cuts us off on the way to work, there's not going to be always a person, like Will Smith on the guided meditation app going, all right, now just release that,
Yeah.
And like that's not a real life thing. And so you kind of have to learn what that experience of releasing and letting go is like on your own. And so
Yeah.
centering prayers is definitely a way that can help. It's more of like a receptive modality. Christian meditation is also a really great one that I love, because it, for people with really active minds, it definitely helps to entrain the thought by giving the attention an object to focus on. And then once the attention's already wrapped up in that object, then the awareness can kind of be watching it. So you start off doing the mantra, and then after a while, you're just watching the mantra being done.
Yeah.
And then after a while, the mantra's doing itself, and you're just awareness. And
It's a trip,
so
man.
yeah, so anything like that, I think, is super helpful.
Yeah. So good. Well, as we wrap up, is there any thing you want to push right now? Anything you got going on? Anything you want to invite people to participate in? New episodes coming out of the methods? Anything like that?
Yeah, I just released one on the Dark Night of the Soul, because that's something that has a lot of misconceptions with like the deconstructing crowd and everything. And so I did one on that. It's more of like a reading and then like a short meditation at the end. Soon, time permitting, I'm also going to be doing a 7-part series on St. Teresa's interior castle. And then I'm also going to be doing a 9-part series on the Enneagram of Awakening. So kind of looking at the Enneagram, not from a personality fixation or psychological perspective, but from a deeper, more like non-dual perspective. So.
I dig that. That's so cool. So that'll be coming in 2021.
Yeah.
Sweet. Awesome, man. Jory, thanks for your time and sharing the wisdom from your journey. And it's been too long, I think, since we've done one of these. And so hopefully we'll have you on again and chat some more. And thank you for joining the Spiritual Nomad podcast again, my friend.
Yeah, man. Thank you.